he Alice Coltrane talked about how she would often see him, or maybe just once, I don't know, looking at a bunch of pictures of cathedrals and sort of studying them, with his horn. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. He must have been looking at the shapes of the cathedrals, somehow seeing how he could transfer that language to his own phrasing or something. But no, then somebody pointed out to me more recently, well, no, he probably was looking at them because that mathematical idea, the ratio idea of the golden mean was used in building, Chartres and cathedrals, and maybe that's what he was looking at, and applying that to music.
Yeah, also some of those old etchings and all have strange perspectives, and it's almost like everything filters down into one simple, horizon point, or I don't know. It seems like something he'd be into.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he became almost like a little bit of like a conceptual artist, in that he seemed to be interested in kind of playing the world or something. He was opening his music up to Indian music and African music, but without it being totally programmatic. He wasn't trying to recreate Indian music or African music. He was just taking parts of it and building on what he already had.
You are listening to The Speakeasy on WFMU. I'm Dorian Devins. My guest tonight is Ben Ratliff, who is a jazz critic for the New York Times, and he's the author of the New York Times Essential Library Jazz, and more recently, the book Coltrane, The Story of a Sound, and we're discussing that very book and John Coltrane. You mentioned that he was... he approached, I can't remember who you were talking about, he had approached to learn from, but he...
Ornette Coleman.
But he did not seem to be really invested in a big ego thing about learning from others. I mean, Monk, there were several people he was happy to take lesson from.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Thelonious Monk was very important to him. And also that little chapter in his life with Thelonious Monk, that's 1957, which is kind of his, his year of like entering the phone booth and coming out Superman, where he quits drinking and he quits heroin. He has some kind of religious awakening. He alluded later to some sort of depression that he got over, and he has this 6-month gig with Thelonious Monk at the 5 Spot on the Bowery. The fact that the gig was so long is very important. It's useful to look at jazz in a labor history kind of way, because gigs are incredibly important to jazz. Gigs are what make working bands really special, and when he could play week in and week out with Monk's group at the 5 Spot, that's when he could just completely take off. And it was going back to work, every day, every week with him, but it was also the shape of Monk's music, his melodies, which were kind of odd. And it was also the fact that, from what I understand, Monk would get up from the piano for long stretches of time, so that it was just Coltrane, bass, and drums, longer than the usual thing that happened when a band leader might, stop playing, and there was this thing called strolling. He would really stop for a long time, and Coltrane would play very long solos. And he had to fill up all that space with stuff. He needed material. And so it was during that time that he came up with all these original licks and patterns and was just firing them off, like lining them up in rows and spitting them out. It was, when you listen to him at the end of 1957, it's kind of too much. It's kind of over the top. it's sort of hyperactive and obsessive, but he's reached a new level of playing the saxophone too.
Mm-hmm. And that new, well, not new, but that CD that came out last year, that was that from that period?
Yes, that's right. That's from the end of that period. That's from, I guess, November, and their gig started in the middle of the summer and lasted till the end of the year.
And that's one of those gems that was sitting in the Library of Congress or something, and nobody knew about? Or
That's right. Yeah, it was. There was a benefit concert at Carnegie Hall with a lot of people on it, including Ray Charles and Sonny Rollins and Jerry Mulligan, Billie Holiday. Each of these bands played 2 sets, and Monk's group with Coltrane was one of those bands, and the whole thing was recorded, and it was just sitting in a strangely marked tape box in the Library of Congress for 50 years. Mm. And it's a great record.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that shows Coltrane, when he's really coming into his own with a new strength, but he still isn't quite there.
Mm. Was that helpful to you when that came out, to have that as a piece of?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Because there isn't a whole lot else of Coltrane with Monk, and that's the big question. Since we know that 1957 was this turnaround year for him, the question for anybody who wants to know about Coltrane and wasn't there, but didn't go to the 5 spot, is, well, what was it about that time with Monk? What was that? What was this magic thing? I think also Monk was another guy with a long attention span who could sit down with Coltrane and show him things at length. And apparently they had long practice sessions, at the beginning of that run. And Coltrane really had time to really explore Monk's music and get into it.
Mm. I bet there were some interesting conversations, although maybe not that many verbal ones, but
there must have been.
Yeah. He went back to Miles Davis after that period, or?
Right. That was in between when he was fired by Miles Davis and then rehired.
And was that on the merit of his Monk run that he was rehired, that Davis had a second
He was ready to take him back.
Yeah.
And also Coltrane's life had changed. Yeah. He was a completely different person. He was, more reliable, for one thing, because his personal habits had changed. And Coltrane let him for the next 2 years. Coltrane let him develop really far and really fast, and in a way that you almost don't expect from Miles Davis, who wanted his musicians to play a certain way. And by 1960, Coltrane is playing these very long and strange-sounding solos that kind of mark, like, well, the 50s is over. We're into something completely different here, and the rest of the band isn't quite sounding like that yet. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Miles Davis let Coltrane go pretty far within his group.
Although Coltrane did voice some question or he didn't really know how to end some of the solos. He wasn't quite sure how to wrap it up.
Yeah, he seemed to have a problem about wrapping things up.